This video is brought to you by all of my wonderful patrons, and if you would like to help support the channel and what I do, I would highly recommend you check out the Patron link down in the description. You can get yourself some pretty cool perks, or if you want to become a channel member, get yourself a badge for your comments, custom emotes when I live stream, you can click the join button down by the subscribe button. And without any further ado, let's begin. This happened a couple of months ago now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to collect myself enough to type it up and post it. It's relevant for me to tell you up front that I'm a military veteran and I have PTSD and anxiety as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my third year of. I've read that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can massively improve PTSD symptoms and in turn help to reduce anxiety, so I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. A jock douchebag type who's a personal trainer, but he trains at home too, 'cause gains. The kind of guy whose only two topics of conversations are protein powder and steamed rice. I'm sure you can imagine the type. Anyway, with that being a constant issue, meditation and quiet mindlessness are just not possible with the constant noise. My solution was to do my normal routine during the day, but take advantage of my insomnia later on. At around 2300 through 0000, I would put on my coat and shoes, and as we live near the beach, I figured I could walk to the beach now that there's pretty much no people around, walk on the sand and be mindful to the sounds of the ocean. Sounds nice, doesn't it? It was for the first 2 times, but you know what they say, the third time's a charm. The walk to the beachfront home isn't far, maybe a little over a mile, but once I got there I would walk to the very end of the beach until you reached the cliffs where there was a World War II artillery gun turret, which was another half-mile-ish. Sometimes I would walk the path up the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean, which was only broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I would close my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt safe there, knowing I was alone. Just me and the ocean. Usually before I would turn tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance to someone who also came to enjoy the view, although I imagine they came during the day. The benches are close to an old pub that was shut down years ago, and I heard the place used to get used as a dogging site or a brothel or something back in the day. So when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards the pub, I figured it was just some young lads trying to catch potential doggers at it. I sat on the bench and waited for the car to pass me, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by headlamps. The headlamps of the vehicle went off immediately and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was fully alert and a bit cautious, so I dropped to one knee and ducked behind the bench I was sitting on. The vehicle drove past me, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I could now see it was an old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle with shitty camo paint on the wings. At that moment, someone popped out of the top of the vehicle with a scoped rifle and a big torch. In that instant, in my head, I was back in Iraq and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped onto my belt buckle and crawled into a path of long grass adjacent to the benches. Then I got in a position where I could see them, but they couldn't see me. The guy with the rifle shone his torch at the exact bench I was sitting on, then the others searching for me. He started looking all around him with the scope, looking where I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard I felt as if they could hear it. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the benches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only was there a row of houses, but an old stone bus stop I could take hard cover if they saw me and opened fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in the long grass, it started to rain and they were still clearly looking for me, but they were now about 150 feet away. The guy with the rifle was scanning around with his eye down scope, so I waited until he was looking away from me to seize my moment to run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet, Then I sprinted towards the bus stop while throwing some zigzags in just in case they had seen me. Luckily they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take my phone out and call the police. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and as I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the gunner's vehicle and took off after them. The officer in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down in sheets by now. They asked me if I was absolutely sure it was a rifle, and I told them yes, it was 100%. No doubt in my mind at all. The officers both looked at each other, and then one of them asked, "And what exactly is your experience with firearms?" I told them I was ex-Army and I've seen my fair share of all kinds of firearms. They then asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which is a pretty fair question to be honest. I explained that quite unironically I was taking a mindfulness walk to ease my PTSD symptoms. They were satisfied with that explanation, if not somewhat amused, and told me that the armed response unit was en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind to make a statement, but the officers told me not to bother waiting around because they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call I made, and also it was pissing down rain so I should get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super wired and my heart was still thumping hard in my chest. I started the walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter buzzed overhead and settled over the area where I had been sitting on the benches with the searchlight going. It was right then it hit me like a shotgun to the chest. That happened. That was fucking real and it was here. What the fuck? My head started swimming. My heart was pounding twice as hard now and my legs felt like jelly and my lungs felt glitchy. I couldn't breathe properly. I dropped to my knees crying in the street in the pouring rain, the only light coming from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb. I was gasping for breath, thoughts flashing in my head, thinking that if I had stayed still, if I hadn't hunched behind the bench, if I had done any number of things differently or hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark in the cold, wet dirt, and my wife would have been none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they have known I'd been there? I'd been there twice before, I suppose. It's not like there's animals to hunt there beyond foxes. But why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and a torch at midnight? Anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that experience terrified me. I guess my army training helped me to stay alert and stay hidden, but I really don't know. I don't go walking at night anymore, and I have the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. A little update. So today I made a call to the local police to try and get an update on what happened. After a quick description of what the initial incident was, the officer on the phone, I assume she was an officer, was able to find the incident report right away. Basically, the first officers on the scene had confirmed that they had seen the vehicle and they had gone in an off-road pursuit. They said they'd given chase over difficult terrain for as long as they were able to. Then the vehicle turned off all the lights and made an escape using the dark as cover. The armed response units were called as a precaution and patrolled the entire area with a helicopter dispatched in order to try and locate the vehicle with heat cameras. Both teams were unsuccessful in finding them, as by the time they arrived on scene they had already gotten away. CCTV was also checked but yielded absolutely nothing. I told her I was sorry if they felt I had wasted their time and that I guess I had overreacted on account of my PTSD. She told me that as far as they're concerned, I did the right thing. She also said that there has been a few isolated accounts of gunshots having been heard in the area over the last few years, so maybe rethink taking my walks so late at night. I didn't have the energy to explain again why I used to wait until so late to go walking, but any advice about avoiding getting shot is good advice. So instead I agreed with her and ended the call. After I hung up, I just sat there a few minutes going over the whole thing in my head. It was most likely nothing when it was all said and done, but if nothing else, it's taught me that being hypervigilant isn't always such a bad thing. It happened in the summer of 2016. I was spending a couple nights alone while my parents were away on a road trip. I don't live in the nicest of cities, but live in a relatively nice neighborhood since it's right next to a major university. I've been followed home a couple of times, had neighbors have their homes broken into and the like, but most of the really bad stuff happens in the downtown area of my city. Anyway, it was late at night on my second night home alone, around 11 p.m. I had been playing some video games with a couple buddies of mine when I decided to go downstairs and make a late night snack. Cliché setting, I know. When you walk down my stairs, you make a 180-degree turn to walk down a short hallway that opens into my kitchen and living room. When you open the door from the hallway into the kitchen, across from the kitchen table is a set of doors that opens into the backyard. The two doors have giant windows that cover the whole door, kind of like a storm door, I guess. Those will become relevant later. As I go into the kitchen and start making some ice cream, I thought I heard some laughing. At first, I thought it was just my phone since I had been listening to a scary story podcast at the time. However, as I paused my podcast and waited a second, the laugh came yet again. The sound was odd. The best way to describe it would be if you took the Star Wars character Yoda's laugh and made it a little creepier. It was childlike and playful, yet it was deep and sadistic. The laugh repeated again for a third time, this time a little louder. I began to look around, wondering if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I walked over to the sink where one of the windows that looks out into the backyard was, and I just saw darkness. There didn't seem to be anything out there, but right as I was about to look away, a face appeared at my window. I immediately jumped back and gasped. The face got closer to the window. It was a man, and he had a giant cartoonish smile on his face. He let out another one of those laughs and walked towards the screen doors next to the sink. He began to jiggle the lock, all the while laughing and tapping at the window. I bolted upstairs, locking myself in my room with my bow staff in one hand and my phone in the other. Just as the operator picked up, I heard the glass shatter downstairs and the laugh. That terrible, creepy laugh echoed through the house. I trembled and stuttered as I told the operator my situation. She told me to calm down and that an officer would be there soon. As I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, I noticed it was silent. I stood there, the wooden floorboards creaking as my weight shifted. Then I heard it. That goddamn laugh. It was quiet at first, but then it got louder. I could hear the man walking up my stairs. The floorboards creaked louder with each step. It got louder and louder, and before I could realize what was happening, he was at my door. I stayed completely silent, ready for him to come in. He tried the door. The lock jiggled. He began to laugh even more as he started to bound on the door. The bounding got louder as he began to throw himself against the door. The latches started to give way. That's when I saw it. The flashing lights. The goddamn police had finally arrived. Before I knew it, they found their way in, and I just stood there frozen. The man let up on the door and just started laughing that terrible, creepy laugh. He laughed when the police got upstairs. He laughed as they took him outside. And I swear I could hear him laugh as he got into the car. The rest of the story is pretty much a blur. My parents came home early, we got the place fixed up, and the guy was convicted of breaking and entering. Now that I'm almost 18, it's just another scary story to scare my friends. A couple of months ago, me and my family of 4, plus 2 dogs, moved from living in a village to living in a small old farmhouse. The house is a 10-minute drive from the nearest town, so it's not too far, but it's one of 2 houses in the area. The other house's occupants were in the process of moving out, so they were rarely home, with hardly anything surrounding it apart from fields, one tucked-away house and one road connecting us to the town. A few days after officially moving there and unpacking most of my stuff, my parents had to go to work. Their jobs usually mean that on the weekdays I have to wait until they finish work for them to pick me up and drive me home. On weekends, this means I stay home unbothered until around evening when my parents get home and my brother wakes up. He usually sleeps for 16 hours at a time due to his crowded schedule or something. On this particular weekend, my parents decided that after work they were going to visit a friend's house on the other side of the area. My brother was home but was determined to stay asleep and told me not to bother him under any circumstances. So basically, I had the whole house to myself for the whole day with no jobs or work to do, apart from like walking the dogs and stuff. So around 6 in the afternoon, it was already getting dark outside. Not so dark that you couldn't see anything, but dark enough that anything you could see was basically just a silhouette with vague features. I was watching YouTube in my room upstairs when I saw the headlights of a car slowly making their way down the very long road towards our house. My first thought was that something was wrong, but then I realized that the car was probably for the other house next to ours whose occupants were just moving out, collecting stuff or something. Due to me not thinking much of the car, I just continued to watch YouTube. Not even 2 minutes later, I hear the youngest dog sounding off downstairs. I instantly get the worst vibe I have felt in a long time, so I decided my best course of action would be to go downstairs and investigate what was causing the dog to bark. Since no one had been downstairs since morning, all of the lights were turned off and it was dark apart from the few lamps in the living room. I got downstairs, I looked to see where the dog was barking. Out the window. My dog had stopped barking as much since I was there now, but just to make sure everything was fine, I looked out the window to see what the cause of her distress was. When I opened the curtain enough so I could get a clear look outside the window, I saw a car still running sitting in front of my garden. It took me a second in the dark also to notice that the front gate of my garden was open. My garden is surrounded by a low stone wall with a wooden fence on a latch. I then realized that a man I had never seen before was standing just beyond the open gate surveying the house, looking through the upstairs window presumably for human activity. I stared in bewilderment at this person for what felt like a really long time before he turned and looked into the window I was staring out of. We locked eyes for about 3 seconds. He looked as shocked as I was. Moments later, he started running towards the car, and in my shock, I didn't know what to do except run upstairs to get my brother. By then, the dogs had made enough noise to wake my brother up, so I ran into his room and frantically yelled at him to come downstairs and look. By the time I managed to get him downstairs, the car had turned around and was pulling away. The road outside my house leads to a dead end, and it's pretty hard to turn around as there's not much space. It usually takes a minute. We saw the car speed off down the driveway, and we just stood there in shock for a while before any of us spoke. We decided I should call our parents to come home and explain what had happened. After around another hour, both my parents were home, and neither of them believed me, brushing it off as probably someone just lost, and told me there was no need to call the police, so I felt really dumb for a while. Fast forward about 3 days. I was in school talking to my friends, and I found out that on the exact same night this occurred, there was a string of serial robberies around the area. Mainly isolated farmhouses were hit. Since then, I've started locking the front doors even in the daytime, and I have a panic every time my dogs start barking or I see a car coming towards the house. This happened in the summer of 2010 when I was just entering my teenage years. My family took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't really remember why we decided to take the trip, but I remember a lot of family friends coming with and staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked my parents, and it's not really important to the story. To preface, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat and always have been. I'm a pretty skinny, fragile kid, so I get spooked pretty easily. Even now. This, however, was almost definitely not me freaking myself out like I normally did. Looking back, I'm incredibly lucky I trusted my instincts. This hotel had a strange design to it. The lobby was actually on the 4th floor, not the bottom floor, which I found strange. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs. This information would have been nice to know before everything happened, as you'll find out. The hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony, and you could look down into the lobby and cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor if they just stepped out of their room and looked around. I always was afraid I'd fall over the balcony and sail down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to be to a point where I wasn't too concerned for my safety. The first day or two was nice. My friends and I hung out and played cards all day or watched whatever was on TV. At night, we'd explore the halls of the hotels and tell each other ghost stories. It was a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were there. On the third day, though, things got strange fast. I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside my door. Now, because of this hotel's design I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top floor of the building. So when I walked outside to investigate, I immediately looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about. I saw a girl laying on the ground, eggs and milk splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious. Maybe she had passed out or something. I scanned the lobby and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided I'd run down to meet them to find out what had happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down. Not a big deal. I descended for a little while looking for the number 4 on the wall or the letter L. I passed floor 5, ready to find a door to the lobby. I took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 3rd or 2nd. Now, at this point, I probably should have turned back, but I continued down because I was tired and didn't want to climb back up. There were some weird side hallways that went into pitch-black areas with a bunch of piping and wiring, and though I was curious to explore, I passed them by. I quickly hit the bottom floor, a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby, so I opened them and entered. Behind the doors was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a smaller basketball stadium. The only light coming in was from the stairwell behind me, so I really wasn't able to see much. Stairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap, tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought I could see some boxes stacked and lined against the wall as well. I was probably in the storage room for the hotel. I looked around and saw an elevator in the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk in the dim light. The room was super muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there in a long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and the other floors. I pressed the up button but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the button. Must have been for employees only, I thought. I turned back towards the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and tables along the way. When I got to the door, I gave it a tug, and it was locked. Of course. This is when things started to hit me, and I realized I was stuck in the dark, dusty basement of a hotel. I didn't have a phone because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't call anyone. Everyone likely assumed I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out, believing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched around the warehouse looking for other ways out. Some areas of the place were better lit than others, so I looked around in the areas I could see first before standing on the darker side of the room. There was one other set of doors that I found, but it happened to be locked as well. I began to cry, scared that nobody would ever find me in this basement. I swear it felt like hours, but I think only a handful of minutes passed before I heard the door creak open. It wasn't the door from the stairwell, rather the second door I had found. A slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of those doors. Now, if this were 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would have been very confused as to why this guy was wearing a lab coat in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time, so I was immediately relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. I approached him, tears in my eyes, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "What are you doing down here?" he yelled. "I got lost on my way down to the lobby and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking, eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my key question, and instead he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk towards the door with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that someone had finally come to save me. We approached the doors and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking. "Isn't it right here?" I asked him. I will never forget the look on his face when I said that. He looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat glistening from his forehead and behind his glasses. "No, this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. We had passed the door to the stairs, and we were now heading to a darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was leading me as he kept checking around him almost as if he was taking in his surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner and began walking towards boxes. A dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very, very wrong. This guy had no idea where he was going, nor did he appear to work at the hotel. I said, my voice shaking, "Okay, where are we going?" He turned and said, "This way. Just follow me." I knew there were no doors by those boxes. I had checked there first after I found out the stairwell door was locked. I want to thank whatever God is up there for gifting me with the idea I had next. I started yelling, as loud as I could. I yelled so loud I gave myself a headache. The man, irritated and plugging his ears, began yelling back at me. "What are you doing? Be quiet." I continued to yell. I don't even remember how long I was yelling. Finally, the man snapped and began quickly walking towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping to God they'd somehow be magically open. He didn't run after me. He walked sternly behind me, muttering things like, "Stupid fucker," and other kinds of compliments. I was about 5 feet from the door when somebody burst through. My savior, a hotel janitor who had heard the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation, me and some random guy in a lab coat in a locked basement, and immediately told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was. I said I had no idea that he had come in through the door on the other side of the room, and I pointed to the door. The janitor quickly radioed into the desk that he had found a child in the basement, and quietly, so that I wouldn't hear, he said, "This man came from outside. Get security or something like that." The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he simply was looking for a bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it and kept saying things like, "Wait till security gets here and talk to them about it." I was standing beside him the whole time, trying to take in what was happening, confused out of my mind. Eventually, an employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby, where I met with my family, who surprisingly had no idea I was missing. I told them the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly, thanking the employee over and over for their help. I never got to thank that janitor, though. Looking back now, I have absolutely no clue what that man was doing in the basement. I don't have any information as to what happened afterwards or who he was. I know for a fact that the incident with the girl in the lobby was unrelated. Something about low blood sugar. Not sure. I've thought about that day a lot, and the only explanation I can put together is that the door I had found in the basement led to the streets of the city where he must have wandered in from. I have no clue what his intentions were, why he was wearing a lab coat, or why he chose to pretend to know a way out. To be frank, this could have been just a huge misunderstanding of some sort, and I just chose a really bad time to get lost. But all I know for sure is that if I hadn't screamed my lungs out, I might not have been telling this story the same way. Or at all. This took place in about 2003. I was working for the Memphis Police Department. Another officer and I got dispatched to a call where a homeowner woke up and found someone in his house and he had an axe. We got there and we were met by an elderly man in his night clothes holding a double-bladed axe with a red stain on the blade. As I secured the weapon, the old man said he woke up and found someone in his bedroom, so he went out and got his axe and hit them with it. My partner and I exchanged looks because there is no way an intruder would stay put while the old man went to get an axe. Then the old man hit us with the comment that the intruder was dead in the bedroom. My partner, who had previous military experience and served overseas in Iraq, went to the bedroom to check. I heard a chirp, and then my partner got on the radio requesting for EMT. He told the dispatcher there was an elderly lady lying on the floor next to the bed who was alive and hurt bad yet unresponsive. At this time, the old man told me about his wife whom lived with him and was asleep in the bedroom. A third officer got there about the same time as the paramedics and assisted me in detaining the old man. I went back in to check on the scene and see about my partner. As I entered the bedroom, the paramedics began lifting the lady to put her on a stretcher. The sight was gruesome, and I don't feel like sharing the details. My partner called out, "Just hold on, ma'am." Then from this lady, a grandmotherly voice called out, "Don't worry, baby. I'm okay." At this, my partner, a hardened war vet, nearly fainted. A paramedic had to keep him on his feet. It amazed me that such a frail, old-looking woman who had such injuries would reassure my partner. The lady was transported to the hospital, and I remained on the scene with the old man. He kept saying how he woke up to find a stranger in his home. It got even worse when he asked to see his wife. It was almost like he had no idea of what was going on and didn't see her get carted out to the ambulance. Eventually, his kids made the scene. From them, I learned that the man had been diagnosed with advanced dementia the day before, and they were going to start some type of treatment the next day. They were so mad at themselves that they had waited. It was a somber time for us all. As best the family and I could figure out was apparently the old man woke up in the middle of the night, didn't recognize his wife of 30-plus years sleeping next to him, and then went and got the axe. I found out later that the tough old lady survived and her husband had to be put in an assisted living care home. Have you ever seen someone bring a sword to what will turn into a gunfight? A mope goes to his estranged girlfriend's apartment carrying his Japanese ninja sword in what I speculate is an attempt to show her he has changed and given up his violent behavior. She answers the door and pleasantries are exchanged. When he demanded to be let into the apartment, unpleasantries are exchanged. She refuses him entry. She tries to shut the door, but he sticks his foot in the door, preventing it from closing, and unsheaths his sword. He makes a tactical error, not knowing the location and capabilities of enemy forces due to the poor intelligence gathering, and forces entry. The ex-girlfriend starts attempting to get him to leave because their children are home, and he slashes her shoulder with the sword. Now the wounded woman grabs his arm and her mother joins in the fray. They both try to disarm the swordsman. They both get hacked a couple of times with help from the woman's new boyfriend. The new boyfriend begins to wrestle the sword from the old boyfriend, who violently jerks it back, slicing both of the hands of the new boyfriend. The new boyfriend is bleeding profusely from both hands, and he is pissed. Did I mention that the new boyfriend is an army recruiter? The new boyfriend assesses the battle and makes a tactical withdrawal from combat. He runs to the bedroom to introduce his little friend, Mr. Beretta 9mm, to the old boyfriend. Just as new boyfriend gets his weapon, old boyfriend, who is in hot pursuit, breaks down the door. The new boyfriend has taken a knee, raised up Mr. Beretta, and sent 2 messengers to stop this criminal act into the brain housing of the old boyfriend. The old boyfriend drops like a ton of crap. New boyfriend starts rendering aid to the wounded woman and got everyone outside. We arrived and called ambulances. When we went inside, there was blood everywhere and a couple pieces of flesh were hacked off. New boyfriend did ask us to check the people living above his girlfriend's apartment because he was afraid one of his rounds might have missed. The new boyfriend, girlfriend, and kids lived happily ever after. The old boyfriend got an all-expense-paid trip to the medical examiner's office. We gave him a C- grade for his efforts. He was winning, until he wasn't. Let's face it, hacking your ex-girlfriend with a sword shows a certain sense of style we have not seen in years. It was an easy clearance for the detectives. While I attempted to make light of this, it really was a gross crime scene. There was so much blood and blood splatter in the living room it was hard to make heads or tails of what had happened. Except for this one incident, I'd say I had a rather pleasant time as a cop. I took my job as a servant to the people seriously, and I always tried to help. I did this for purely selfish reasons. It made me feel good to help, and it made me feel bad when I had to use force. On this incident, I did neither, and it hurt the most. I often took the night shift because that is where the action is. You don't get bored. It was about 2 a.m. and the bars were closing. I was parked in a strip mall within sight of several bars. At 2 a.m. sharp, the last of the bar patrons were pushed out the doors at the bars and started for their cars. From my car, I could see one tall, slim working girl was making her last-ditch effort to be taken home by somebody. She wore a very skimpy dress and she repeatedly flashed her bare chest and tiny panties. It didn't work. When the last guy drove off, leaving her there, she sat down on the ground behind her car. I'm sure it was part of her image, but I noticed her car was a classic Jaguar XJ sedan. It was probably about 10 years old and suffering from a lot of rust, but if you squinted a little, it looked nice. I watched her for about 10 minutes just sitting there. Then she got up and promptly fell down again. She was way too drunk to drive. As she made her way to her car, I started my car and radioed for a female officer to assist me in what I assumed would be a DUI. An officer friend of mine named Judy answered and said she was on her way. I had no jurisdiction until she actually drove her car onto the road, so I waited. As soon as her car reached the road, belching black smoke out the tailpipe, I gave chase and stopped her before she got even a quarter mile. She pulled over into a mall parking lot and I pulled up beside her car about 10 to 15 feet away. She jumped out of her car and immediately flung off her dress. Now wearing only her tiny string panties and high heels, she proceeded to dance around in a very seductive manner, constantly beckoning me to come over to her. Okay, picture this. It's 2:30 a.m. in an empty parking lot and I'm all alone with a sexy drunk female. It was prudent on my part to wait for Officer Judy to arrive rather than risk trying to subdue this woman by myself. I leaned up against my car and watched the show. The drunk woman danced around for a while and then grew either tired or frustrated that I was not reacting, and she pulled off her skimpy panties and got into some serious poses while jumping all over her car. She crawled up onto the roof and then slid down to the hood with her legs spread wide, trying to get a reaction from me. Actually, I was kind of enjoying the show, and I felt a little bad that I secretly didn't want Officer Judy to interrupt it. As I was looking down at my watch and wondering where Judy was, the drunk woman slid down the front of her hood and began rubbing herself on the Jaguar hood ornament. She was oohing and eyeing, and she humped the chrome ornament as if it was a dildo. Quite suddenly, her foot slipped off the front bumper and she spun around, pivoting on the chrome Jaguar, and fell headfirst over backwards onto the ground, all the while screaming like a banshee. She immediately grabbed her private parts and tucked into a fetal position, still screaming. I ran over to her and, not knowing what else to say, I asked, "Are you okay?" She shouted at me, "No, you fucking idiot, I'm not okay." And then she pulled one out from between her legs and grabbed my arm. Her hand was covered in blood. I told her I would call for an ambulance, but I had to go back to my car. She held my arm tightly for a moment and then let go. I ran for my car, but just as I opened my car door, another car with their headlights on bright came up fast and slid to a stop right beside my car. Officer Judy jumped out of her car and shouted to me that she had already called for an ambulance. She then went over to the drunk woman and checked her out. I really couldn't do much but watch. In anticipation of this being a potentially major public incident, I radioed for the dispatch to send over the OIC, officer in charge. He is the senior-most cop in the department that is on duty at this time. I then got out my blanket and first aid kit and gave them to Judy. While I was wondering where Judy came from, the ambulance arrived and took over. The OIC arrived and I explained everything that happened. Judy explained that the woman had ripped her vagina on the hood ornament and had internal bleeding and would probably need surgery. She also told the OIC that she had been parked about 50 yards away and watched the whole thing to see how I would handle it. She vouched for me that I did everything by the book and never did anything that was inappropriate. She said she had decided to drive up to the scene as the woman slid down the hood just moments before she hurt herself. The OIC was upset and scolded Judy for not going directly to the scene, but he shook his finger in her face and said with a smile, "Now don't ever do that again." I spent the next few hours filing out my report and retelling the events several times. The woman was treated and fully recovered. I saw her several weeks later back at work, and she had no memory of me. I felt bad about her getting hurt, but I was told by the OIC and Judy that if I had done anything else, it could have been very bad for me and the police department. If Judy had not witnessed the events, the woman could almost certainly have sued the department and me. Judy got chewed out for parking and watching, but nothing serious. I also was mad at her for leaving me in that position for so long. Actually, it was only about 5 minutes. To make it up to me, she bought us both a nice dinner at a local restaurant. When I got transferred and left the police force, I had a goodbye luncheon. It was customary to give the departing person gag gifts. Judy gave me a plastic version of the Jaguar hood ornament, wearing a condom. I've seen death. I've seen abuse. But nothing even comes close to the death notification I had to deliver. I never post these kinds of things in regards to my thoughts and feelings, but I'd like to get this off my chest. It was my first death notification and it was brutal. The victim was struck by a drunk driver driving 100 miles per hour the wrong way on a country road. The car hit her at such an angle that the car somehow climbed on top of her and decapitated her. She was 78. I arrived at the woman's home to speak to her 50-year-old daughter, but she wasn't home. From there I went to the neighbors trying to locate her or figure out when she'd be back. From this I learned that the daughter's father died a year ago and today was the anniversary. Meanwhile, the wife had left her husband of 20 years after finding out he had been cheating on her for about 18 of them. She was staying with her mom because she had no support. Finally, about an hour later, I see her pull up to her mom's house. I approach the daughter and identify myself. She thought I had followed her to give her a ticket and then explained the difficult time she was having in her life and begged me to give her a break. I will never forget her wailing after I told her her mom was dead. She crumbled in front of me and kept screaming for her mom. She said she couldn't do this without her. I sat with her and waited for her sister to arrive from an hour away. I hope I never have to live through a silence like that again. As I drove away, I knew I would never forget that night. Despite everything else I've seen as a soldier and a cop, nothing else ever hit me like that notification that day. On the 7th of March 2015, I was on duty in a marked police car. I was driving straight and traveling 40 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone. I had the green light going through the intersection. An elderly man ran the red light and T-boned me right in the driver's door. I saw the car coming a split second before it hit me. Instinctively, I cranked on the steering wheel to deflect the impact. The car struck my driver's door, causing me to spin around counterclockwise. About halfway into the spin, my right rear tire caught on something. The car continued to spin, but now was airborne. My patrol car landed and rolled 360 degrees. When the car stopped, I tried to get my door open, but it was jammed. I was terrified that the car was going to catch on fire and I would burn alive. This happened to a fellow officer I knew back in 2007. Fortunately, it was a busy intersection with a lot of people. A bunch of men came running up and pried the door open. My only thought was to get away from the car. An off-duty fireman came up and told me to stay still and not move. He reassured me that my car was stable and he put his hands around my neck to stabilize my neck against any possible trauma. Rescue arrived and they slapped a neck collar on me. They then cut my uniform shirt off and my bulletproof vest and removed them from my torso while I was still sitting in the driver's seat. They then cut me out of my gun belt and slipped a backboard behind my back and then rotated me and pulled me into the stretcher. My face was all cut up with glass fragments from the windshield shattering. Glass fragments were embedded in my scalp. Glass shards were in my eyeballs. They got me transported to the trauma center, and thank God I was released to go home later that same day. I did a lot of physical therapy and had to have an operation on my shoulder, but recovered 100% through the grace and mercy of God. This is a traffic incident I responded to one day in 1994. I received a call about a wreck on a bridge spanning a 4-lane highway. When I arrived, I saw a Honda Accord sitting on the bridge in the wrong lane of travel on the medium of the highway underneath it, facing back across the bridge. The entire front end of the car in front of the passenger was flat against the passenger compartment with some damage on the passenger's side. Across the bridge, I saw a bread van type truck with the name of a large tool company plastered on its side. If you aren't aware, these trucks drive from shop to shop selling tools and taking orders. So needless to say, they are heavy. It was sitting in the correct lane of travel about 50 feet in front of the Honda and sitting over the outside of the shoulder highway underneath it, on its end of the bridge. Its front end was bent up but not smashed in very bad. I stop and go over to the front passenger window, which is no longer in the car, to check on the occupants. There's a little girl about 3 years old sitting in a child seat or booster seat, I can't remember, in the front passenger seat. She is crying hysterically, rubbing the top of her head with her left hand. Her scalp is cut across the top of her forehead, and every time she swipes at the place that hurts, she unfolds it back over itself, exposing her skull back over her ears. She had hit the windshield and it sliced her open. Her right leg was broken and swelling, as well as her right arm. Mom was sitting in the driver's seat, dazed, just looking at me. She had a goose egg on her forehead from hitting the steering wheel, blood running down her face. Her right jaw was already swollen from being broken, and her right femur was bent at an odd angle as she sat there. Her left arm was angled also from a fracture in her forearm. I told her to grab her daughter's arm and hold it. I wanted as little contamination in her scalp as possible. She grabbed the baby's arm and stared at the dash. She couldn't talk. I ran across the bridge and spoke with the driver of the tool truck. He said that he was traveling straight onto the bridge when the Honda pulled directly into his path as the mom had tried to enter the on-ramp of the freeway. My guess is that she was distracted by the baby or something and didn't see the truck coming. So his tracks smacked the car right across the bridge because of its sheer mass. I couldn't get the picture of that little girl crying and sweeping her scalp back, and then the scalp falling back on her head, out of my head for several weeks. She couldn't figure out what was wrong, but she hurt and it was on the top of her head. There was nothing I could do but make sure the paramedics had a clear path to her and her mom as soon as they got there. That was all I could do. When I worked in narcotics, I would often be called upon to either work in an undercover capacity or set up and monitor audio and video electronic surveillance equipment. I was called back to my department from a task force assignment to work on a case involving a gentleman who was looking to hire a hitman to kill his wife. The detective working the case wanted to act as the gun for hire, but wanted me to set up and monitor an undercover car with audio and video surveillance equipment. The following night, this 50-something-year-old man meets with the detective/hitman and explains in detail not only that he wants his wife killed, but when, where, and how. He explains that she works a night shift and comes out at a specific time to take a smoke break. The man wants his wife shot in the head from a distance with a rifle. He agreed to a price and gave some money to the undercover officer and then left the meeting. Fearing this guy wasn't stable and might take matters into his own hands, we reached out and transported his wife from her job to the station. When she was told of her husband's plans, she became hysterical and went to pieces. He had given her no indication that he was unhappy with their marriage. Next, we had uniform officers pick up this gentleman killer. I got to do his interview. I discussed the situation with him for about 20 minutes and he continually denied trying to hire anyone to harm his wife. He knew we had the hitman at the station, but didn't know he was a cop. He accused him of lying and setting him up and even blackmailing him. I let this go for a while so anyone later listening to this recorded statement would see the depth of his lies. I then gave the signal for the hitman/undercover officer to enter the room. The door opens and in walks the hitman detective wearing his gun and badge. Well, the man just dropped his head in disbelief. The next words out of his mouth I still to this day cannot believe. "Well, she's got bad hips," he said, referring to her arthritis. So he was intending on having his wife murdered, shot in the head, because she had hip pain? We learned later, although not from him, of the more realistic motives including insurance policy, gambling debts, and a relationship with a prostitute. The case didn't need to go to trial as he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to many years in prison. But never before or since that day have I heard such a disturbing reason to murder your own wife as having bad hips. I work at a large crafting store in California and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's going on is needed. So last year we hired this guy named Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative and over the next couple of weeks started to never stop talking. He would constantly say weird shit. For instance, one day he was putting in a charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the table he was working on and said something about cutting his wrists if he couldn't figure out how to put it together. Another time we were both working in the stock room and he kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter. I'll admit he did in fact look like that kid, which was creepy. I remember one day I had gotten off work and was just waiting for my ride to pick me up when out of nowhere Hayden walked up beside me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face and I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing much, just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going inside a Taco Bell and shanking someone right across the parking lot from our work." He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after saying that. When my wife picked me up, we saw him just walking towards the Taco Bell and he flashed us this creepy-ass ear-to-ear smile. The last straw for me was when he and I were assigned to work our spring freight and get it loaded up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and it was over at noon. It was 11 and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at once. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us we'd both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was pissed off at this point and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized. He then said something that concerned me. He had said in the most serious tone that I had heard him speak in since meeting him, "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to say that he knew where all the emergency exits were and would first shoot all the cashiers and then move on to the other employees in the store. I'll admit I didn't immediately report what he said, but it did have me on edge and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what had happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside and revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what was said, but Hayden apparently admitted what he had said and kept asking if I was the one that reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store, still am, and I was heading to the break room for my final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to a paint case and asked if I could help him with some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on that particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name, and he said it was just a lucky guess, to which I thought it was BS, mainly because his tone of voice seemed sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he was staring at me with a smirk on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name of a popular TV show character. He asked what year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point, I started to walk away as I had other things to do, and the whole time I was walking away, he was still trying to talk to me. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that same day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy who was buying the paint, and I told her I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me and if I'm a good worker and if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he's come into the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this guy might be cousins with Hayden, as they sort of look alike and have similar mannerisms. Both look similar to the Parkland shooter and have that same creepy vibe. This might not be the scariest thing on here, but it's still freaky. An update from a few days after this story was written. Tonight I worked the closing shift and was outside getting carts after the store closed at 8 p.m. when 2 SUVs pulled into the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store and the other one parked in the main parking lot. I was standing in the front entrance doors when a man dressed in all black and wearing a hood stepped out of one of the SUVs. Another guy walked up to him and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them that we were closed, and I looked down to notice a large baseball bat in hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to let me back inside, and these guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot staring right at me. My manager let me in and called the police. The guys were long gone when they got there. This could have easily been a totally unrelated incident, but I thought I'd still update because the whole thing makes me think it could have been you-know-who. This happened about 2 or 3 years ago, but I still think about it every now and then when I'm walking alone and no one's around. I was volunteering at a school in a rural area about 3 kilometers from my home. I didn't know how to drive, and I have an irrational fear of biking. That's another story, so I didn't mind walking home every Wednesday. I was 19 at the time, but just know that I looked 3 years younger. Short girl, round face, big eyes, no makeup. It was winter. It was cold. It was raining, and I had no umbrella. It's fine though. I like the rain, and I was covered from head to toe, so I enjoyed my peaceful walk with music blasting through my earphones. But as I was walking, I saw something in my peripheral vision that always scared me in a situation like this. A car slowing down, following me. I didn't know what to do. I tried not to assume the worst, and I turned to see whether that was the only car on the road or if there were any other potential witnesses in case something happened. Nope, just this one car following me. No one else around as far as the eye could see. Then the driver lowers his window and I see his face. Old man. Seems to take care of himself. Unfortunately not weak looking. Eyes fixed on me. Where you going? Would you like me to take you somewhere? I take out my earphones. Huh? I had heard him, because at this point I had already turned down the music to be more aware of my surroundings. Plus, despite not wanting to assume the worst, I still wanted to buy some time to think of an out. Where can I run? Can someone hear me if I scream? Can anyone else see us? Where can I get help? Well, there was no one and nowhere to run or really hide. I was walking in this very rural area on the side of the road that had one field on one side and woods on the other. There was just one abandoned house up ahead, so I tried to reason with myself. This man is probably just concerned that I'm visibly walking a long distance, right? So I say, Oh, no thanks. I'm fine. I like walking. Oh, no, I don't care about that. I just want you to get in the car. What? Maybe he's concerned because it's raining and I don't have an umbrella? No thanks. I know it's raining, but I like the rain, so I'm okay. No, I don't care. I just want you to get in the car. I'll drive you where you need to go. For fuck's sake. Really? I'm giving this potential kidnapper 2 excuses and he doesn't take them? His intentions are becoming clearer and clearer. I can't ignore this anymore, and he never breaks eye contact. Like he's analyzing my every move and reaction. I'm starting to notice that his smile is starting to become more sinister too. Is it just my fear tricking me? I'm trying to look as friendly and naive as possible because I don't want him to realize that he can't trick me to getting into his car and his only choice would be to use force. Remember, no one can hear me if I scream. Listen, I just want to talk to you. Can I? Well, okay, what is it? No, I mean, I want to talk to you properly. Get in the car. I just want to talk to you. That's the only moment he breaks eye contact, and it's to slowly look at me from head to toe. Well, you know what? How about I park a little bit further and you can join me to have a chat? Sure, I don't know if you'll find a place to park anywhere close, but go ahead if you want, sir. I'm only walking straight anyway. Perfect. See you there? Yes, sir. He smiles and drives away. I wait for his car to be far enough so he can't see me, and I immediately turn to run to the abandoned house to hide while I make a call for my mom to come and get me. Police wouldn't do anything since I'm not in immediate danger. We've tried to call them once after some serious threats from a stalker, and they just told us only to call if the stalker was on our property. That's another story. I explain everything to my mom, and she tells me to send her a screenshot of Google Maps with my exact location just in case something happens, and to stay hidden while keeping an eye on the road to see if the man's car appears again. I'm about to end the call when I see his car drive by again. And what do I see? He's looking right at me as if he already knew exactly where I was hiding, waving at me with a smile on his face, still with this trying very hard to seem friendly vibe. He knows I'm hiding and on a call with someone now. He knows I wasn't as naive as I was pretending to be. Then he just drives away. My mom's still on the phone with me, so I tell her what just happened, and she tells me to stay calm and wait for her. We end the call, I wait, and he doesn't come back again. My mom's car appears much faster than I anticipated. I get in and we go home. I still can't wrap my head around what exactly happened or what could have happened. This happened in my first year at university in Australia. I was moving out of home for the first time, and I think this made me very, very naive in this situation. I was a 20-year-old female. I found a cheap place in the city near my workplace and university at the time. $150 for a room in a share house only 20 minutes out from the CBD. It seemed like an awesome deal to me. I messaged the landlord and told her that I was interested. Before she gave me a time to come and inspect the place, she seemed overtly interested in my ethnic background. I'm half Ethiopian, so I definitely don't look white, but when I told her I'm Australian, she suddenly became withdrawn. I thought it was strange. Maybe she thought I was lying because she had seen my profile photo on flatmates.com, so I explained my background. She seemed satisfied with my answer, and we organized a time for me to come and see the room. I will call the landlord Denise. Denise showed me around and talked as if the place was already mine, which I thought was exciting. There was a main house with 5 bedrooms, a caravan on the side, and a granny flat behind it with 3 bedrooms, which is where I would be moving in. The main house and the caravan were full, 7 people living there, but only one of the rooms in the granny flat was occupied. It was nice enough considering, and very clean. A weekly cleaner was included in the rent price as well as a weekly maintenance. I didn't think to ask what that meant because I was pretty set on moving in. I met the people who would be my housemates. All of them were foreigners, mostly Chinese and South Korean, who had come to study. I still didn't find this odd. I mean, there are plenty of international students here. The door in my room had a lock on it, and I was told only myself and Denise had a key. But Denise never came to the house, so there was a nice level of privacy. A week after I moved in, I met the maintenance guy. I'll call him Patrick. He seemed to be gardening and came over to introduce himself. Seemed nice enough. I found out he's Denise's brother, and he looked to be in his late 40s or so. I found him a bit awkward, but I've been raised to be polite to a fault, so I ended up talking to him for a long time before going back to my room. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember him saying things like I was very beautiful and describing my skin as exotic and caramel more than once, which rubbed me the wrong way. A few days later, the cleaner comes also. She is super lovely and has known Denise and Patrick for a long time. She and I had a nice chat, and for some reason she brought up that Patrick was on the autism spectrum. So to me that explained his awkwardness, and I realized he's harmless. So I felt bad for my initial judgment of him. Next time I saw him, I came out of the kitchen and saw him standing there. This struck me as odd. One, it was in the morning and I was in my pajamas having just woken up. Two, he's the maintenance guy. I don't understand why he should be inside. But I still felt bad, so I just smiled and said hello. He turned and seemed startled, but explained to me he was just taking out the trash. I saw that he had replaced the bins in the kitchen, so I was just like, oh, okay, he was just trying to be nice, I guess. But I told him he didn't really have to do that. He just kind of insisted, and I was like, alright, whatever. Ended up talking to him again. Again, he seemed to have a weird fixation on me being exotic, even though I had told him I was born in Australia. But mostly he was just generally asking how I was finding the place, and he reiterated that everything was super safe, and for some reason brought up the keys to my bedrooms. He said to me Denise and him had keys. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I said, wait, since when does he have a key? But I still kinda brushed it off. Cut to a few months later. I work about 4 to 6 days a week, casual, as well as going to uni 4 days, so I'm rarely there during the day and lock the bedroom door before leaving every day. I don't remember exactly what time of year this would have been, but I know it was colder and I hadn't used the ceiling fan in my room for a while. I got home, unlocked my bedroom door, and the ceiling fan was on. This struck me as odd immediately. I knew I hadn't turned it on in forever. I was very, very confused, and thought I'd turned it on while leaving and just didn't remember. I brought it up to my roommate and she just kinda shrugged and said that's odd, but didn't seem weirded out by it, so I figured I was overthinking it. Note that I kept to myself a lot. I wasn't close with any of my roommates and only talked to this woman occasionally. A few weeks later, I'm leaving work and I have a very strange feeling while walking to the front gate of the house. For some reason, I turn around and I see Patrick hiding behind some bushes staring at me. As soon as he's caught, he turns and pretends to be gardening. In the moment, my mind actually kinda went blank. I was like, surely he wasn't watching me. All I did was frown and wonder why he would stare at me like that and then pretend that he hadn't been. I come back later in the day, unlock my door, walk in, and again something is off. But this time I can't put my finger on it. I stand in my room looking around, staring at everything in the room, but I can't find anything. When I realize that I didn't know what I was looking for, I feel creeped out and leave my room and tell my roommate again that I thought someone had been in my room. This time she sat down with me and basically said she thought someone went in her room recently too. We chatted and she said that she had left her back bedroom window open and she went to work, and when she came home it was shut. I brought up the fan again and my roommate said maybe we should let Denise know. So I texted Denise and said something along the lines of, I think someone's been going in my room because of these events, and my roommate said the same thing. I exchanged a few messages with Denise, but the general response from her was just, oh wow, that's so bizarre. Again, being super naive, young, and too polite for my own good, I assumed I was overreacting and didn't want to seem like a bad tenant. Thankfully, it turns out Denise was more sympathetic than I realized because she said she was going to have the locks changed the next day. I was like, yay, thanks, and assumed that would be it. But in my head I was thinking, only 3 people have keys. Me, Denise, and Patrick. So if someone's been coming in, wouldn't it have been one of us 3? Which is why I didn't feel good when Patrick showed up the next day to change the lock himself, being the maintenance guy and all. I ended up leaving while he did the change. Got a text later saying it was done and new keys were in the mailbox. Fast forward. I had now been at this place nearly a year. By now I was aware that Patrick seemed to come over about twice a week and he always came inside the house to take out the rubbish, but never really seemed to do maintenance work. I chalked it up to Denise giving him a job because he couldn't find one elsewhere, and I tried to avoid him. As far as I remember, nothing else seemed strange. Until now. I come home from work and walk into my bedroom, and while I'm getting my clothes to shower, I notice something very, very strange that was definitely not there when I left. There was a whitish, pale gunk kinda splattered upwards on the wall and the floor. Honestly, my first thought after looking at it for a while was like, that looks like donut glaze or something. I leaned closer to it, but still didn't register what the stuff was, only that I definitely hadn't spilled anything there at all. So again, I got creeped, went to the kitchen to grab a Chucks and wipe it, when I had a thought like, wait, is that semen? I really didn't know what to look for, but as soon as I had that thought, nothing could convince me otherwise. And again, my door had been locked. Only myself, Denise, and Patrick had keys. My roommate wasn't even home, but I called Denise right away. She didn't answer, so instead I messaged her and basically said someone had been in my room and there was some weird stuff splattered on the wall. I wanted to see if she came to the same conclusion I did. Her response this time was really off. She messaged back hours later and was dismissive, something like, "Very bizarre. The lock's been changed though." And I was like, "Yeah, obviously. So who do you think would have been in here?" I felt so weird and grossed out I went to a friend's place and messaged my stepdad about it. I told him everything for the first time, and I guess it sounds a lot worse all at once because his response was, "Hell no, you're moving out of there." I called Denise and told her I was going to move out if the issue wasn't taken seriously. This is when I realized that the leasing situation at this place was dodgy, which I didn't know beforehand due to my lack of experience and no sense to ask. Essentially, there was no record of me actually being a tenant, and I was kind of just sending money into this lady's bank account, but there wasn't any official paperwork. I looked back over the stuff I signed when I initially moved in, and it was typed up by Denise, I assume. I don't remember details, but it wasn't official at all. Super naive. So I was able to move out ASAP. Denise didn't put up a fuss about the short notice. When I came back the next day, the stuff on the wall was gone, so I didn't have any proof of what happened. But that just kind of confirmed to me that something weird was going on with Denise and Patrick. My stepdad helped me take all my stuff. I didn't have much. Denise just left a message and said, "Please leave the keys on the counter." It took me a few weeks to process every creepy thing that had happened throughout my stay and put it all together as a mass creep fest. My roommate left soon after. Months later, she messaged me to say that one of her old housemates told her the police were called on the place. Don't know why or what happened, but I suspect it wasn't for the tenants. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, share it with your friends. And if you would like to help support the channel, you can check out my Patreon page and get yourself some pretty cool perks along with being a supporter of the channel. Or if you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down by the subscribe button and get yourself a cool badge, some custom emotes when I live stream, all that good stuff. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day, and I really do appreciate you checking out this video. And I will catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.